The letter arrived on the breakfast tray at 9:30, and by the time I had read it twice, I knew I would not be in this house by sunrise. I set the cup down without drinking. The footman, Hargrove, was watching me, the way servants watch when they have already read what they delivered, and I made my face still and gave him nothing. The seal was my own, the small bird and anchor of the Vance line that my mother had pressed into wax 100 times in the last year of her life. The hand inside was not hers. The hand inside was my late father's solicitor, Mr. Pemberton of Lincoln's Inn. And what Mr. Pemberton had written was that the codicil had been found. Not lost, found. Suppressed for 3 years, and now, at last, in his keeping. "That will be all, Hargrove." He bowed and went, and I sat with the letter folded against my knee and thought, in a calm, clean voice that surprised me. I am 23 years old, and I have been a guest in my husband's house for 14 months. And tonight, I will leave it. Not a guest. The word was wrong. I had been the Duchess of Ashforth for 14 months and 3 days. And the man who had married me, who had stood across from me in St. George's, Hanover Square, with his jaw locked and his eyes on the middle distance, and who had said, "I will," in a voice meant for the back pew, had not addressed me by my first name since the carriage door shut behind us on our wedding afternoon. I had counted. One does when there is little else to count. The codicil meant I did not need to count any longer. I rang for my maid, Bess, and when she came, I told her to pack 2 trunks, only 2, and to do it without speaking to any other servant in the house. Bess was 19 and had been with me since I was a girl in Hertfordshire, and she had the quick, narrow face of someone who had been waiting for me to say this exact sentence for 14 months. "Where are we going, my lady?" "Lincoln's Inn first, then Hertfordshire, then we shall see." She did not ask why. She set the breakfast tray aside and went, and the door closed behind her, and I stood at the window and looked out at the Mayfair Square, at the iron railings, at the plane tree turning its first autumn leaves, at the small grey carriage waiting at number 9. And I thought, he does not know yet. He has not read his post. He will read it in his study at 10, and at 10:15 he will come up these stairs to find me, and I must be gone before then. The codicil Mr. Pemberton had written named me, not the dowry, not the settlement. A separate provision of my father's, written 6 weeks before his death, lodged with a country attorney who had died 18 months later, the box of his papers sold at auction, the codicil purchased by a London bookseller for the price of the calfskin binding, and at last, after 3 years of patient searching, returned to Lincoln's Inn by a clerk who had recognized the seal. £8,000 in the funds, in my own name, untouchable by marriage. A house in Hertfordshire, small, 3 bedrooms, a paddock, that had been my mother's before it had been my father's, and was, by the codicil, mine. And the words to my daughter Eleanor, that she may never be wholly without recourse, whatever the world may make of her. My father had known. 3 years before he died, with me 16 and not yet out, he had known that the world might make something of me that would require recourse. And he had built me a small house and a small fortune, and put them where no husband's signature could reach. I sat down on the bed and I cried for 1 minute exactly. And then I stopped, because Bess had come back with the first trunk, and the day was moving. The Duke of Ashforth, Adrian Hale, the 7th of his line, 31 years old and as cold as the marble in his own front hall, had married me in the second week of August in the year 15, for reasons that had been transactional and were now, in the ordinary course, exhausted. I will state them plainly, because the ledger of this marriage requires it. My father had died in the spring of 14, leaving an estate so encumbered that my elder brother, Thomas, had inherited a barony and a mountain of paper. Adrian's late father, the 6th Duke, had been the principal creditor, £11,000 advanced on 3 notes across a decade, all of them now Adrian's to call. Adrian had called them in the June of the next year. Thomas, 25 and unequal to it, had gone to him at Ashforth House on a Tuesday morning and come home in the evening grey-faced, and had said to me across the dining table, "He will forgive the notes. He will forgive the entire sum. He requires a wife, and he has been told that I have a sister." I was 21. I had been out for 2 seasons. I had been admired, in a quiet way, and proposed to once by a clergyman with red hands whom I had not been able to imagine across a breakfast table. I had no other offers in prospect, and a brother whose debt was a noose, and I said yes within the hour, and I was married within the month. Adrian did not court me. Adrian sent a coach to fetch me from Hertfordshire, met me on the steps of Ashforth House, bowed precisely, and addressed me as Miss Vance until the service began, and Lady Ashforth afterwards. And that was the courtship. The wedding night had been the wedding night. I will not write what was said in that room, because little was. He had been correct, and he had been gentle in a clinical sort of way. And when it was over, he had risen and dressed, and gone to his own apartments on the other side of the corridor. And in 14 months he had not crossed back. He took breakfast at 9. I took mine at past. He dined in his club 4 nights of every 7. The 3 nights he was at home, he ate at a long table with me at the foot of it, and the candles between us. And he spoke of the harvest and the lords and the price of corn. And at the end of the soup, he asked whether I had any business that required his attention. And at the end of the fish, he wished me a quiet evening. And at the end of the meat, he stood and went to his study. This was the marriage. It was not cruel. It was almost worse than cruel. It was nothing at all. And I had borne it. 14 months of nothing at all. Because I had had nowhere to go, and nothing to my name, and a brother who could be ruined still if I made him angry. And because some part of me, in the first weeks, had imagined that nothing would in time become something, the way a frozen river thaws if one only waits. It had not thawed. And then, 8 days ago, at the small dinner he had given for his political friends, with Lord Carmichael and Sir Henry Westwood and Mr. Talbot of the Commons present, and their wives in their pearls and their watchful eyes, I had said something at the table. I cannot now remember what. Some small remark about the corn laws that Sir Henry had set up, and I had finished. And the table had laughed. And Lord Carmichael had said, "Your Duchess is sharper than you let on, Ashforth." And Adrian had looked at me down the length of the candles and said, quite distinctly, in the voice he used for the lords, "I am tired of looking at you." The table had gone still. I had set down my glass with a hand that did not shake, and I had said, and I remember this exactly, because it was the only sentence of our marriage I have ever been proud of. "Then don't." He had not answered. He had looked at his plate. The conversation had moved, after a long bad moment, to the East India Company, and the dinner had finished, and the guests had gone, and I had walked up the stairs to my apartments alone, and I had not seen him since. 4 days later, the letter from Mr. Pemberton had come. The codicil had been found, and now, on the 8th morning, I was leaving. Bess and I were in the front hall at 5 minutes to 4 in the afternoon, the trunks already on the carriage I had hired through a back channel, when the door of the study opened. He was in his shirt sleeves. He had been writing. There was ink on the side of his hand and a small mark of it at his temple, where he had pushed his hair back. And I noticed, with a clarity that frightened me, the way his thumb moved across the rim of the inkwell as he stood holding the doorframe and looking at me. I had not seen him touch anything in 14 months without thinking. That is a hand that has not touched me, except to put a ring on my finger. But the way his thumb moved across that rim was the gesture of a man who had been thinking, and thinking hard, and not enjoying his own thoughts. Eleanor. It was the first time he had used my name aloud since the registry book. I felt it. I will not pretend I did not feel it. It went through me like a struck bell, and I held the railing of the hall table to keep my face still. And I said, "Your Grace, I am leaving the house. The carriage is at the door. The notes against my brother are paid in full, by your own hand, and I am not in your debt. I will be in Hertfordshire by tomorrow. I do not require to be followed. Eleanor, I have not given you leave to use my name. I had not meant to say it. It came out of me with a coldness that I did not know I owned, and I saw it land." He stopped in the middle of the hall, and his hand went up to his hair and through it. And for 1 second, 1 full second that I have never forgotten, the Duke of Ashforth looked, in his own front hall, like a man who had been struck. Then his face closed. The Duke came back into it. The man went away. Lady Ashforth, 8 days ago at my own table, I said something to you that I have not been able to write down since. I have been trying for 4 nights to compose a letter. I have torn up 9 drafts. I came down this morning to ask whether you would consent to receive me in your sitting room at 4 o'clock, and I find you in the hall with your bonnet on. Yes. May I ask where you have come into the means to leave? You may not. He looked at the trunks. He looked at Bess, who had gone very still at my elbow. He looked at me, and his eyes, which were not grey, they were a brown so dark that in candlelight they read black. But in the 4 o'clock sun coming through the fanlight above the door, I saw, for the first time, the streak of amber through the iris that I had been married to for 14 months without noticing. His eyes moved over me as if he were trying to memorize a face he had not properly looked at before. "I had hoped," he said, "to speak with you before any irreversible step." "You had 14 months?" "Yes." He did not argue it. That was the thing. He did not argue it. He stood in his own hall, in his shirt sleeves, and he said yes. And he put his hand against the doorframe of the study, as if he needed it, and he said, "Eleanor, Lady Ashforth, if you will give me half an hour in any room of this house you choose, with the door open and your maid present and any witness you require, I will say to you what I have been failing to write. After that, if you still wish to go, I will hand you into the carriage myself." "And the notes? My brother's notes?" "Burned. The week of the wedding. I never told you because I never told anyone. I had not thought it would matter." I looked at him. I thought of the codicil in my reticule, and the carriage at the door, and the £8,000 in the funds that no man could touch. And I thought of how a year ago this offer of half an hour would have undone me, and how today it would not. And I felt the small, clear power of that, and I held it. No, I said. I will not give you half an hour. You had 14 months and a great many half hours, and you used them at your club. I am going to Hertfordshire. If you wish to write to me at the small house at Wickbourne, you may do so. I will read your letters. Eleanor. That is twice. I beg your pardon. Lady Ashforth. I walked past him. I did not look at him. Bess walked behind me. The footman at the door, not Hargrove, the one called Peter, who had been kind to me when I first arrived, held it open without meeting my eye. And I went down the 3 shallow steps to the pavement, and Bess handed me into the carriage, and the door shut, and we were in the square, and we were in Park Lane, and we were on the Great North Road by 6. It was not until Hatfield, by the light of the carriage lamp, that I let myself cry properly. Bess held my hand the whole way and did not speak. It is necessary to explain Wickbourne, because what happened next happened because of it. The small house had been my mother's. She had brought it to her marriage. My father had loved her enough not to absorb it into his estate. When she died, he had left it sealed and unvisited, with a caretaker, a Mrs. Marsh, who had been my mother's nurse before she was anyone else's. After my father died, Thomas had wanted to sell it. The codicil, as I now knew, had prevented him. The codicil, in fact, had passed it directly to me and out of Thomas's reach without his ever being told. Which was, I think, the kindest thing my father did in his final months. Mrs. Marsh had been writing to me for 2 years through a circuitous arrangement involving the rector's wife at Wickbourne and a milliner in St. Albans, because letters to Ashforth House had been read by the steward, and Mrs. Marsh had not been willing to write anything that the steward might see. I had not understood, until I read the codicil, why a caretaker would maintain such an elaborate channel. I understood it now. Mrs. Marsh had been waiting for the codicil. She had been waiting for me. We arrived at Wickbourne by way of St. Albans at 1:30 in the morning, after the moon had set, with the carriage lamps swinging and the roads so dark that the driver had walked the last mile at the horses' heads. The house, a low square box of yellow brick, with 3 windows across and a wisteria on the south side, and a paddock running down to a stream behind it, stood with 1 lamp burning in the kitchen, and Mrs. Marsh at the door in her grey shawl, her face wet with tears before I was out of the carriage. She put her hand against my cheek as if I was 6. She said, "Welcome home, Miss Eleanor." Not Lady Ashforth, not Your Grace. Miss Eleanor. The name I had had before I had been sold to pay my brother's debts. I sat down on the kitchen settle in my travelling cloak, and I wept until I could not weep any more. And Mrs. Marsh made tea, and Bess took off my boots, and when I was done I drank the tea, and I said, "Tell me everything you have been wanting to tell me." And Mrs. Marsh did. What Mrs. Marsh told me, across 2 hours, with the kitchen fire built up and the cat asleep on the hearth, was that my mother, in the last weeks of her illness, had written a series of letters to Mr. Pemberton that no one in the family had known about, and that one of those letters had named, in 3 lines, the reason for the codicil my father would write 6 weeks before his death. The reason was a man called Lord Marsden, a creditor of my father's, whose first attempt to collect, by way of marriage to his eldest son, had been the cause of my mother's final illness. Or so my mother believed. The Hales, Adrian's family, had been allies in that fight. The 6th Duke had bought up Marsden's notes against my father at a loss, and had held them, and had refused to call them, and had died still holding them. The £11,000 Adrian had inherited as a debt against Thomas was, in its origin, £11,000 the sixth Duke had spent to keep me out of Marsden's hands when I was 16. Adrian, when he had called the notes in and offered the bargain to Thomas, had been calling in his father's investment. I had not been bought, exactly. I had been, and the word made me set the cup down, recovered. I sat very still and I said, after a long moment, "Mrs. Marsh, did Adrian know this?" "That is not a question I can answer, Miss Eleanor." "Did his father tell him?" "I do not know." "Would my mother's letters tell me?" "They are in the bureau in the morning room, sealed. Your father had them sent down a year before he died, and instructed me that they should be opened only when you came here, in person, of your own will, without your brother's accompaniment." I sat with this. I thought of Adrian in the hall in his shirt sleeves, saying I have torn up 9 drafts. I thought of his thumb moving across the rim of the inkwell. I thought of the dinner 8 nights ago, and the sentence, "I'm tired of looking at you." And I thought, with a hot, small flare of anger that surprised me, that whatever those letters contained, it did not undo the dinner. It did not undo 14 months of silence. It did not undo a marriage spent at the foot of a table he ate at 4 nights of 7. But it complicated him. And complication, I was learning, was the beginning of a story, rather than the end of one. I went to bed at 3:30, and I slept until 11. The first letter from London arrived at Wickbourne on the Thursday. It was not from Adrian. It was from Mr. Pemberton at Lincoln's Inn, and it confirmed everything the codicil had promised, and added one detail Mrs. Marsh had not known. The £8,000 in the funds had earned 3 years of interest, and the interest, by the codicil's express provision, was mine to draw immediately, without application or signature from any third party. The sum stood at £447, 11 shillings, and will be paid into a country bank at St. Albans against my note in person. £447. A governess earned 25. I read the letter twice, and I sat at the bureau in the morning room with my mother's sealed letters at my elbow. 6 of them, tied with a black ribbon, the seal still unbroken. And I did a calculation. With 400 a year, I could keep Wickbourne, and Bess, and Mrs. Marsh, and 1 manservant, and I could live, and I could think. And I could write back to Adrian, or I could not write back to Adrian. And the choice would be mine, and not anyone's. I had been the Duchess of Ashforth for 14 months, and I had never owned the choice of whether to answer my own correspondence. I picked up my pen. I did not write to Adrian. I wrote to Thomas. I wrote 3 lines. I am at Wickbourne. I am well. The codicil has been found, and the small estate is mine. I do not require anything from you. Eleanor. I sealed it and gave it to Mrs. Marsh for the post, and I sat at the bureau and looked at my mother's letters for a long time, and I did not open them. Not yet. The second letter came on the Friday. It was from Adrian. It was on plain paper, not crested, and it was 4 pages long, and the hand was neat and small, and entirely different from the hand I had seen on his rare household notes. That hand had been the public ducal hand, all flourishes and authority. This hand was private. It was the hand of a man writing as himself. It began, "Eleanor, I will use your name once, and then not again until you give me leave." I sat in the morning room window, and I read it. He wrote, in 4 pages, the following. He wrote that he had married me in obedience to his father's deathbed instruction, which had been to call in the notes against my brother and to offer marriage in their place, and which had been given to him without explanation in the second to last week of the sixth Duke's life. He had been 29. He had not been told why. He had honoured the instruction because his father had never asked anything of him before, and because there had been something in the way the request was made, something pleading and, unlike his father, that had made him agree without question. He had married me, he wrote, expecting to find a young woman trading herself for her brother's name, and to honour her with all the decencies of a duchess, and none of the indecency of a husband who pretended to a feeling he had not had time to develop. He had thought that he was being kind by leaving me alone. He had thought, and here the hand became smaller, as if he were ashamed of the sentence, that I would prefer it. He had been, he wrote, an idiot. He used the word. He had begun to understand, by the third month, that he had married someone he had not bothered to meet. He had not known how to undo this. He had not known how to begin again. He had retreated into the routines of his rank because they were the only things he knew how to manage. And the more he saw me adjust to the silence at the table, the more certain he had been that I preferred it. And the certainty had become a wall, and the wall had become 14 months. The dinner, he wrote, had been the failure of the wall. Lord Carmichael had said, "Your Duchess is sharper than you let on." And what Adrian had heard in the half-second before he spoke was, "You have a wife, and you have not let on. You have not let on to her. You have not let on to yourself." And the sentence that had come out of his mouth had been the sentence of a man trying to push away a wife he had only just understood he wanted, and did not know how to deserve. "I'm tired of looking at you" was, he wrote, the worst sentence he had ever spoken to another person. And he had spoken it because to keep looking at me across that table would have required him to say what he should have said in the carriage on our wedding afternoon, which was, "Eleanor, I do not know you, and I would like to." He had tried for 4 nights to write what he had not said in the carriage. He had failed. He was failing now in this letter. He would not insult me by pretending the letter was sufficient. He asked only that I read it and not destroy it, and that if at any point in the coming months I wished to receive him at Wickbourne, for an hour, for a half hour, for 10 minutes in the paddock with Mrs. Marsh present, he would come. He would come in any clothes, by any road, at any hour, and he would say to my face whatever I required him to say. He had signed it, "Yours, if you ever wish me to be, Adrian Hale." I read it twice. I put it in the bureau and locked the bureau. I went out to the paddock and I walked the fence line 3 times in the cold November sun. And Bess brought me my shawl at the second turn and did not speak. I did not answer that letter for 9 days. In the 9 days, several things happened. I rode into St. Albans with Mrs. Marsh's nephew driving the small gig, and I drew £30 against the interest on the 8,000. I bought a desk, a kettle, 6 bolts of fabric, 2 pairs of boots that fit, and a copy of Mr. Wordsworth's poems, which I had wanted for 2 years and had not asked Adrian to buy because asking him to buy me a book had felt, for reasons I now understood, like asking a stranger to choose me a husband. I came home with the things in the gig and put the boots on and walked the paddock again in them, and they fit. I opened my mother's letters. I did it on the 3rd night, alone, with the fire built up and a glass of the rector's mediocre claret on the side table. 6 letters, written across the last 7 weeks of her life. 5 of them were to my father, and they were practical and tender and full of household arrangements for after she was gone. And the reading of them broke me in a way I had not been prepared for, and I cried into Mrs. Marsh's apron for an hour. The 6th was to me, sealed separately, addressed in my mother's hand. To my daughter Eleanor, to be opened when she comes home. It was 3 pages. It said, among other things, "Your father has told me of the arrangement with Marsden. He has refused it. He has paid the man's price out of capital that we cannot easily replace, but he has refused. He has done this because I have asked him to, and he has done this because, Eleanor, you are 16, and you do not yet know it. You are not a girl who will marry a creditor's son and survive it. You will marry a man who looks at you across his own table and sees you. Or you will not marry, and either of those is a life. The 3rd, the trade, is not. Your father understands. Your father has built you a house." And then, on the last page, in a slightly less steady hand, "If a man comes to you who looks like he wants to be honourable, but does not know how, Eleanor, be patient with him for 1 season, but not for 2. Honourable men learn quickly when they are made to. The ones who do not learn in a season do not learn." I read it. I read it again. I put it back in the envelope and I held the envelope against my chest, and I sat very still. And after a long time, I went to the bureau and I took out the 4-page letter, and I read it again, with my mother's 3 pages on the desk beside it. 1 season, not 2. We were, by my count, in the 3rd month of what my mother would have called the 2nd season. He had taken longer than my mother would have allowed, but he had begun at last to learn. I picked up the pen. I wrote 3 lines. Lord Ashforth. You may call at Wickbourne on the 22nd of November at 3 o'clock. You may stay for 1 hour. Mrs. Marsh will be in the room. Eleanor Vance. I signed my maiden name. I did it deliberately. I sealed the letter and I gave it to Mrs. Marsh. And Mrs. Marsh looked at it and looked at me and said, "Good, Miss Eleanor." Nothing else. He arrived at Wickbourne on the 22nd of November at 5 minutes to 3, in a hired chaise rather than his own carriage, a detail Bess noted at the window and reported to me with her face perfectly straight. And he came up the gravel path in a plain greatcoat, and not the ducal one, and he had shaved without a valet, which I could see because there was a small nick under his jaw that he had not concealed. He took off his hat at the door, and he stood in the small hall of my mother's house, and he was too tall for the room, and he knew it. I came down. I was wearing one of the dresses I had brought from London, the dark blue wool that he had never seen me in, because he had never come up to my apartments, and the boots I had bought in St. Albans, and my hair was pinned simply by Bess, and I had not put on the pearls. He looked at me. He did not bow. "Miss Vance?" It startled me. It startled me into a smile that I could not catch in time, and I saw him register the smile, and steady on his feet, as if a wind had hit him. "Your Grace, I have come for the hour. May I sit?" "In the morning room. Mrs. Marsh will bring tea. I have asked her to remain." He followed me into the morning room. He sat where I indicated. He did not look around the room. He looked at me, and only at me, with an attention so concentrated that I felt the back of my neck go hot. And I thought, with a kind of cold wonder, he has been practicing looking at me. He has been practicing for 9 days. He is afraid of looking away. Mrs. Marsh brought the tea. She sat in the corner with her knitting. She did not speak. I poured. "You have an hour," I said. "Use it." He set the cup down without drinking. "I should not have written what I wrote. I should have come." "You wrote what you needed to write. Coming first would have given you the advantage of my surprise. The letter let me read at my own pace. It was the right choice. Go on." He blinked. He had not, I think, expected to be corrected toward kindness. "My father," he said. "I have made inquiries. There were letters between him and your father across 9 years. My father kept them in a deed box at Ashforth Park that I had not opened until the week before last. They concern the Marsden business. They concern, in particular, the decision that the notes against your brother, the notes I inherited and called in, were to be held as your father's protection of you and not as a debt to be enforced. My father had given a private undertaking. He had not told me. He had told me to call them in and to offer marriage, and he had told me this as if it were a transaction, and he had died before I could ask him why. I drank my tea. My hand was steady. "You did not call them in," I said. "You forgave them. You told me so in the hall." "I forgave them in the week of the wedding. I had not known about your father's protection then. I forgave them because I had met you in the registry, and I had thought, whatever transaction this was meant to be, I will not be the man who held the notes over her brother for the rest of his life. I did not tell you because I did not want it to be. I did not want it to be the thing that purchased your gratitude. I see now that the silence purchased nothing at all. It did not. No." We sat. Mrs. Marsh's needles clicked. The fire moved. "I have come," he said, "to say 3 things, and I will say them, and then I will go. The first is that what I said at the dinner was the worst thing I have ever said to another person, and I will not say it again, and I do not ask you to forgive it, only to know that I know what it was. The second is that I have come to understand, in the 9 days since you left, that I have been married for 14 months to a woman whose mind I had not bothered to meet, and that the loss is mine, and that I am asking, not for your hand, which I already have by law, and which I would surrender tomorrow if you required it, but for your acquaintance, for the first conversation we have ever had, for the slow and unmerited gift of being known by you." He paused. He looked at his hands. "The third is that if you will not give me that, if the hour ends and you ask me to go and not return, I will go, and I will write to my solicitor in the morning, and I will set in motion a separation by deed of trust that leaves you in possession of this estate, of your codicil, of an additional 600 a year, and of complete liberty. I will not contest. I will not pursue. I will live in my own house, and you will live in yours, and the world will think what it thinks, and I will bear it." I set down my cup. "Adrian." He looked up. He had not been expecting his first name. The whole of his face changed. "Adrian," I said, "I am going to ask you a question, and you are going to answer it, and you are going to answer it as if your title were not in the room. Did you, in 14 months, ever once wish to come up the corridor and knock on my door and stop yourself because you thought I would refuse you? Eleanor, answer the question." "Yes. Every night for the last 4 months. Twice on the night before the dinner." And you did not knock because I had built it into a wall, and I did not know how to make a door in the wall. Because every time I imagined knocking, I imagined you opening it with a face that said, "What now?" And I could not. Eleanor, I could not have borne that face. I was a coward. I am still a coward. I am sitting here in your morning room with a draft of separation papers in my pocket, because cowardice is the only language I have rehearsed. I sat with this. Mrs. Marsh's needles had stopped. "Show me the papers." He took them from his coat. He set them on the small table between us. They were drawn in his own hand, not his solicitor's, his own. He had drafted them himself. The provision was as he had said. The settlement on me was generous beyond what the law required. The estate at Wickbourne was confirmed in my sole possession. There was a clause, I read it twice, that he had inserted at the end in his own neat small hand. Provided that nothing in these articles shall prevent the said Lady Eleanor Hale, formerly Vance, from withdrawing this deed at any time within her natural life, upon her sole signature, and without my consent or knowledge, and resuming the marriage as if these articles had not been drawn. A separation she could undo, at any time, by her signature alone. I looked at him. He had built me a door in the wall, and given me the only key, and he had done it before he came. "Adrian?" "Yes?" "Put the papers back in your coat." He did. His hand was not steady. "I am not signing them today. I am not refusing them either. I am keeping a copy here in the bureau with my mother's letters, and the original will go back with you to London. I will write to you. You will write to me. We will, as you have asked, become acquainted. You will come to Wickbourne when I invite you, and you will not stay longer than I invite you to stay. And you will not address me as Lady Ashforth in these rooms, because Lady Ashforth is a person you married without meeting, and I am someone else. What shall I call you? In these rooms, Eleanor. In London, when and if I come back to London, we shall see." He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, I saw that he had been holding tears and had not let them fall, and the holding had cost him. "Eleanor." "Yes." "Thank you." "You have not earned the thanks yet. You have earned the chance to earn it." "Yes." He stood. The hour was not yet up. There were 19 minutes left by the clock on the mantel, but he understood, I think, that it was finished for the day. He bowed properly, the bow of a man to a woman whose acquaintance he wished to have, not the bow of a duke to his wife. At the door he turned. He had his hat in his hand. "May I write tomorrow?" "You may write whenever you wish. I will answer when I wish." "That is fair?" "It is exact." He smiled, a small, broken, real smile that I had not seen on his face in 14 months, and that I had not, in fact, ever seen, because the man who could make that face had not been at the long table in the dining room. And he went out, and Mrs. Marsh's nephew drove him back to the inn at St. Albans, and the gravel was quiet again, and I sat in the morning room with the deed of separation on the table and my hand on top of it. And I did not cry. I will not draw out what came next, because it came slowly, in the way real things come, and a season is a season. He wrote on the Tuesday. I answered on the Friday. He wrote again on the Monday. The letters were short at first. They became long. He wrote about the harvest at Ashforth Park and asked, with care, what I had planted in the Wickbourne paddock. I wrote about the Wordsworth and asked, with care, what he had been reading at his club. And he confessed that he had not opened a book in 3 years and asked what I would recommend. I sent him my Wordsworth. He came to Wickbourne on the 20th of December, by my invitation, for 2 hours. He came on the 8th of January for an afternoon. He came on the 3rd of February for 2 days, and he slept in the inn at St. Albans, and he walked the paddock with me in the morning frost, and we talked, for the first time, about the dinner. He told me what he had been thinking in the half-second before he spoke.
I told him what I had been thinking in the half-second before I answered.
We did not forgive each other in that conversation. Forgiveness was not the right word. We located each other. In late February, on a Tuesday, the second move came. It came from Adrian's mother. The Dowager Duchess of Ashforth, Lady Honoria Hale, 61, of Mount Street, a woman I had met 3 times in 14 months, and who had addressed me on each occasion as the girl and never by my name, had not approved of the separation arrangement when she had learned of it, and she had learned of it because the world learns everything. And she had decided, in the way of dowagers, to repair what she considered a humiliation to the family name. She arrived at Wickbourne, unannounced, on a Tuesday afternoon, in a coach with 4 horses and a footman in the Ashforth livery, and she came up the gravel path without ringing the bell and walked into the morning room before Bess could announce her. And she stood there in her black bombazine and her diamond brooch, and she said, "Eleanor, you will collect your things. You will return with me to London. This farce ends today." I was at the bureau. I had been writing to Adrian. I set the pen down, and I stood. "Your Grace, you are welcome at Wickbourne, but not on those terms. Mrs. Marsh will bring tea." "I do not want tea. I want my son's wife in my son's house. Do you understand what you are doing to the family? Do you understand the talk?" "I understand the talk perfectly. I am the talk. I am also the legal owner of the house you are standing in, and the holder of an annuity my husband may not touch. And I am here by your son's express written agreement. And I am writing to him at the moment you walked in unannounced. He is besotted. He is not himself. You have engineered—" "I have engineered," I said, and I heard my own voice go quiet and even, the way it had gone at the dinner. "Exactly nothing. I left your son's house with my own funds, in a carriage I hired, on the strength of a codicil my father wrote 10 years ago. And your son followed me here, on his own knees, and offered me a separation in his own hand. If you wish to be angry with someone, Your Grace, be angry with your husband, who set the entire arrangement in motion, and did not tell his son why, and with your son, who took 14 months to come up the corridor. Be angry with me last. I am the only person in this story who has acted with my own information." She had gone red. She was a woman who reddened in patches, the way some women do, and the patches had bloomed on her throat and at the bridge of her nose, and her hands had gone tight on the head of her cane. "You insolent girl! My name is Eleanor. Your son's wife has a name. You have not used it in 14 months. Use it now, or leave my house." There was a silence. Mrs. Marsh was in the doorway with the tea tray and had stopped. And Bess was at the foot of the stairs. And the Dowager Duchess of Ashforth, 61 years old, 3 dukes deep in the family, a woman who had not been spoken to in such a tone since the year of Waterloo, stood in the middle of my mother's morning room and looked at me. She did not say my name. She turned. She went out. She got into her coach. The coach went down the lane and turned at the gate and went toward London. And Mrs. Marsh set the tea tray down on the bureau and said in a voice I had not heard her use before, "That was beautifully done, Miss Eleanor." I sat down. My hands were shaking. I had not known they were shaking until I tried to pick up the pen. I finished the letter to Adrian. I told him exactly what his mother had said, and exactly what I had said back. I did not soften it. I sealed it and gave it to Mrs. Marsh and went out to walk the paddock. And I walked it 5 times, and when I came back, the letter was gone. His answer arrived 2 days later by express. It was 1 page. It said, "Eleanor, my mother will not call at Wickbourne again. I have spoken with her. I have told her that the next time she addresses you by anything other than your name, she will not be received at Ashforth House." I will say this for her. She did not contest it. She wept. She has not wept in 20 years to my knowledge. We are, perhaps, all of us learning. A. I read it. I put it in the bureau with the others. I went to the kitchen and asked Mrs. Marsh to bring out the silver, my mother's silver, which had been packed in straw in the attic since 1810, and to set the dining table for 2, because Adrian was coming on the Friday, and I had decided that he would eat in my house at last. The Friday came. I will set down what happened that night, because it is the answer to what was said at the dinner in London. He arrived at 6. He had ridden from town, not in a carriage, on a horse, and he came into the front hall in his riding clothes, with a cold on him and his hair disordered, and he stopped when he saw the table. It was set for 2. The candles were lit. The silver was my mother's. The roses were the late November ones from Mrs. Marsh's garden, which had bloomed past their season because the autumn had been mild. Bess had laid the cloth, and Mrs. Marsh had cooked, and Mrs. Marsh's nephew had been sent to the inn for the Friday evening, so that we should be entirely alone in the room, with only Bess in the kitchen within call. Adrian stood in the doorway, and he looked at the table, and he looked at me. "Eleanor?" "Adrian, sit." He sat. I poured the wine. I had been practicing pouring wine in front of guests for 14 months, and I had been practicing it in front of him for 3. And the difference was that this time, my hand was steady, because I was pouring it in my own house. He noticed. He noticed everything now. The thing about a man who had spent a year not looking at his wife was that when he learned to look at her, he could not stop. And I felt the looking across the table the way one feels heat from a fire on the side of the face. I lifted my glass. "To the dinner in London." He did not laugh. He held the glass very still. "Eleanor." "Drink, Adrian." He drank. "I have been thinking," I said, "about what you said. I'm tired of looking at you. I have been thinking about it for 4 months. I have decided what it meant." "Tell me." "It meant I have been looking at you for 14 months across this table without permission to know you, and I cannot bear another minute of looking without knowing. It came out as cruelty because you had no other language for it. You had built a wall, and the wall had no word for, 'I want to come through.' So the wall spoke for you, and it spoke wrongly." He set the glass down. He did not drink again. "Yes. I am not I want to be clear, Adrian. I am not forgiving you because I have decoded the sentence. I am telling you what the sentence meant because the meaning is the beginning of the answer. The answer will take longer. The answer may take another year. Take the year. I intend to. We ate. We talked. We talked about books.
We talked about the Corn Laws and Sir Henry Westwood, and what I had wanted to say at the dinner before he had spoken, which I had now remembered, and which I told him, and which made him laugh. A real laugh, low and startled, the laugh of a man who had not laughed at his own table in years. After the meat he did not stand. He did not say, "I hope you have had a quiet evening." He stayed. He poured more wine. He asked, with the small, careful voice of a man whose courage is bigger than his confidence, whether he might be permitted to read aloud from the Wordsworth I had sent him, because there was a passage he had been thinking about, and he was not sure he was reading it correctly. I said yes. He read. He read Tintern Abbey, the long passage about a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts. And he read it slowly, and his voice, which I had heard for 14 months as the voice of a man on the floor of the Lords, had another voice underneath it, a voice that knew what the words meant. And I sat at my mother's table in my mother's house, and I listened to my husband read poetry to me for the first time. And at the end of the passage, I understood that there was no wall left. I stood up. I went around the table. I stopped at his chair. Adrian. He looked up. Stand. He stood. He was very tall in the candlelight, and the streak of amber through the dark iris of his eye was visible in the way it had been in the 4 o'clock sun. And his thumb moved across the rim of the wine-glass before he set it down. And I thought, I have noticed his hands again. I have been noticing them for 2 months. I have been noticing them since the hall. I put my hand against the side of his face. The shave under his jaw had healed. The jaw was warm. He closed his eyes. Eleanor. You have permission to use my name. Eleanor. He said it like a man drinking water. I kissed him. I will not write the kiss. It belongs to the room, and the room was small and dark and lit by my mother's candles, and it had waited a long time for it. He did not move his hands until I put them where I wanted them, and then he held me as if he had been instructed in the holding of me by a long correspondence, which, in a way, he had. And when we stopped, and we did stop, because the kiss was a beginning and not an ending, and I had been clear with myself about that before the soup, he stood with his forehead against mine, and he did not say anything at all. And I understood that the silence was finally the right silence, the one that had a name now, and the name was we. I stepped back. You will sleep at the inn tonight, I said. Yes. You will come back tomorrow. Yes. You will not come up the corridor in this house until I tell you to. And I will tell you to, but not tonight. Eleanor, yes. Go. He went. He bowed first. The bow was different again. The bow of a man to a woman he had earned the right to bow to. I sat in the morning room afterward, and Mrs. Marsh brought me a fresh pot of tea and did not ask. And Bess came in and unpinned my hair and did not ask. And I sat with my mother's letters in my lap, the 6th one open at the line, "Honourable men learn quickly when they are made to." And I read it, and I closed the envelope, and I put it back in the drawer. And I went to bed.
and I slept. I was the Duchess of Ashforth again in the spring. I came back to London on the 1st of April, by my own decision, in my own time, with Bess and Mrs. Marsh's nephew and the small Wickbourne carriage. And Adrian was waiting at the door of Ashforth House on the steps. He had been waiting there, Hargrove later told me, since 11 in the morning. We had agreed I would arrive at 3. He had not been able to sit indoors. I did not move into my old apartments. He had had them redone in the colours I had mentioned in the letters, pale yellow and a deep green, with a desk by the window because I had said I missed having one. And I came into them and I cried for 1 minute exactly. And then I stopped, because Bess was unpacking and the day was moving. We dined together that night. We ate at the small round table in the morning room, and not at the long table in the dining room. And the long table was, by my request, dismantled the next week and a smaller one put in its place. And the dining room became a room we ate in together, rather than a room we ate in across. And when Adrian's mother dined with us a month later, she sat with us at the smaller table and addressed me throughout the meal as Eleanor. She had wept again, Adrian told me, when he had instructed her on the form of address. I did not require her tears. I required her courtesy. And I had it. And that was the end of that matter. The codicil money, the £447 and what it grew into, stayed in my name. The Wickbourne house stayed in my name. The deed of separation that Adrian had drafted in his own hand stayed in the bureau in the morning room at Wickbourne, in the drawer with my mother's letters. And we went there together in the August of that year for a fortnight. And we walked the paddock, and we ate at my mother's silver. And he read to me again, Cooper this time, and Dr. Johnson. And we did not speak of the deed, because the deed was a door that did not need to be opened, only to exist. In the September of the following year, 1817 by the ledger, our daughter was born. We called her Margaret, after my mother. She was a small, dark-haired thing, with her father's amber-streaked eyes, and Adrian held her in the chair by my bed for an hour without speaking. And at the end of the hour, he laid her in my arms and he said, "Eleanor." "Yes." "Thank you." "You have earned it now," I said. He kissed my forehead. He kissed our daughter's forehead. He did not let go of my hand until I slept. Lord Carmichael, who had said at the dinner 2 years before, "Your Duchess is sharper than you let on, Ashforth," sent a christening cup of plain silver with a card that said, "To the sharpest Duchess in London, with apologies for the late recognition." I kept the card. It is in the drawer at Wickbourne with my mother's letters and the unused deed. And on the rare occasions I open the drawer, I read all 3 things together: the deed, the letters, the card. And I close it again, and I go on with the day. I will tell you the last thing. A year after Margaret was born, in the September of 1818, I was in the morning room at Ashforth House, the new one. We had moved the morning room. And Hargrove came in with the post, on a salver. There was a letter from my brother Thomas, who had married a sensible woman, and was at last keeping his house in order. There was a bill from the milliner. There was a card from Lady Carmichael for a dinner. And there was, at the bottom of the salver, a small, square paper, folded twice, with no seal, in Adrian's hand. He had left it that morning before going to the Lords. It said, "Eleanor, I have been looking at you across this room for 6 minutes while you read your letters. I am not tired. I will never be tired. A."
I folded it.
I put it in the inside of my work basket, where the other ones were,
because there had been others, because he had taken to leaving them for me almost every day, in the small, careful way of a man who had once said the wrong sentence at a table and had decided, in the rest of his life, to say the right ones, quietly and often. Hargrove was at the door. "Will there be a reply, Your Grace?" "There will," I said. "Bring me a pen." I wrote 3 lines. I gave them to Hargrove. He took them up to the study. I do not need to tell you what they said. You can imagine them. You have been reading them, in one form or another, the whole way through. By morning, that first morning, he had not been able to find me. By every morning since, he had known exactly where I was, because I had told him, because I had chosen to, because the door in the wall had a handle on both sides at last. And the rest, as my mother might have said, is a life.